1 million accounts in 20 hours? That is how fast a single line of injected script tore across MySpace in 2005, and every victim caught it just by looking at a profile page. No download, no click, no login. They loaded a page, and the page ran the attacker's code. This is cross-site scripting, the web attack at the center of today's Security Plus lesson. And by the end of this scene, you will know the one browser behavior that makes it possible. Stick with me because that behavior is also the entire secret to defending against it.
And the name of that behavior is the whole lesson. This is cross-site scripting, or XSS. The key insight is that the attacker's code runs inside the victim's browser, in the trusted context of the genuine website. The browser simply cannot tell the difference between the script the developer wrote and the script the attacker slipped in. Both arrive from the same trusted address, so both get the same trust. That confusion is not a bug in one site. It is the entire attack class.
Before we go further, let me show you the face behind that MySpace number because it makes this real. A student researcher named Samy MySpace wrote it on his own profile, mostly to see if it could be done. Anyone who viewed his profile ran his script, which quietly added him as a friend and then copied itself onto that visitor's own profile. So the next person to look ran it too. It was self-propagating, and in under 20 hours it had passed 1 million accounts, and MySpace pulled the whole site offline to scrub it.
And notice what Samy did not do. He did not steal a password or break into a database. He simply got a page to treat his input as code, and the browser did the rest. That is the shape of every XSS attack, from a harmless prank to a payment card breach.
One distinction to hold from the start. Injection attacks the server. Cross-site scripting attacks the other users. Same word, injection. Different victim.
So the way I keep it straight is this. My read is that cross-site scripting is fundamentally a confusion between data and code. The site meant your comment to be data, just words to display. The browser was tricked into treating those same words as code to run.
That is exactly it, and it is worth drawing because the picture is the point. On one side, the site's intent. On the other, what the browser actually did with the very same characters.
And every defense we cover later is really just keeping that one line from blurring. Keep the browser reading your comment as data, and the whole attack collapses.
Here is a detail the exam loves, and it surprises a lot of candidates. In the older OWASP Top 10, cross-site scripting had its own dedicated slot. In the 2021 edition, OWASP folded XSS into the broader injection category.
And the reasoning is exactly the data versus code idea Liam just named. Whether the untrusted input lands in a database query or in a browser, it is the same root failure, untrusted data reaching an interpreter that runs it. That is why they now sit in one family.
One scope point because it matters. XSS does not need a login, a password, or any sensitive form on the page. If a page reflects your input and a browser runs it, the door is open.
So even a plain brochure site with a comment box qualifies. My read is that people assume only banking sites get hit, but the flaw lives wherever input gets echoed back onto a page, full stop.
Which teed up the exact question I want to hand to the room, because it is the one sitting under every XSS tutorial ever posted. Erica, you flagged it this morning. Go ahead and read it out.
Happy to. The recurring question is this. If my site does not store passwords, do I even need to worry about cross-site scripting?
Hold that thought, because the honest answer is a flat no, you are not safe. Coming up, we will name the 3 flavors of XSS. Watch an attacker steal a live session with no password at all, and then settle the one defense debate that decides your exam answer. Let us build up to it.
Three types. Know them cold. The exam will hand you a scenario and ask which one it is.
And here is the frame that makes them stick, because the exam wording hangs on one thing. The difference between the 3 types is not the payload. The payload can be byte for byte identical across all 3. What changes is the path the script takes to reach the victim's browser. Reflected, stored, and DOM are 3 different delivery routes, not 3 different weapons.
Reflected is the bounce. The script rides in on a single request, usually a crafted link or a search box. The server takes that input and echoes it straight back into the page, and the browser runs it. The classic tell is a search result that says you searched for and then prints whatever you typed.
And the delivery is the giveaway. Because nothing is stored, the attacker has to hand the poison link to each victim, usually by email or a chat message. OWASP also calls reflected non-persistent for exactly that reason. It runs once, for the one person who clicks.
And that bait requirement is also Reflected's weakness as an attack. The malicious link looks long and ugly, stuffed with script right there in the address bar, so a careful user or a mail filter might catch it. The visible tell is part of why Reflected scores lower on impact than the next one.
So Reflected needs bait. Someone has to click my poisoned link for it to fire. My read is that makes it loud but limited, 1 victim per click.
Stored is worse. The script is saved on the server, in a comment, a profile field, a product review, and then it runs for everyone who loads that page. The exam name is persistent.
Which is why stored carries the highest impact of the 3. No bait, no link to send. The attacker plants the payload once, and the vulnerable page itself serves it to every single visitor automatically. The Samy worm from Scene 1 was stored XSS, which is exactly why it scaled to 1 million.
Picture a hospital portal where nurses read patient comments all day. One stored payload in 1 comment, and it fires in every clinician's browser every time they open that page. 1 injection, thousands of executions.
And it does not even need the obvious spot. A stored payload can hide in a display name, a support ticket title, or a product review, any field the site saves and shows back to someone else later. Wherever untrusted input is stored and rendered without cleaning, that is a home for persistent XSS.
So the third one, DOM-based, is the sneaky one. My read is that the trick word is that it never touches the server at all. Am I close?
Dead on, the page's own JavaScript reads a value from the URL or the page itself and writes it into the document unsafely. The malicious value can even sit in the part of the URL after the hash mark, which the browser never sends to the server.
And that is why DOM-based is so easy to miss in an audit. The whole attack plays out client-side, so your server logs show absolutely nothing. No request, no record, no trace on the back end.
And the way to reason about DOM on the exam is 2 words, source and sink. Let me show you what that actually looks like in the code, because seeing it is what makes the abstract pair click. The source is the attacker-controlled input, here the part of the URL after the hash. The sink is the dangerous line that writes it into the page, inner HTML. Untrusted source flows straight into a dangerous sink, and the browser parses the injected tag.
And the fix is the same idea, just on the client. Use the safe line, text content, instead of the one that parses HTML. Same source, harmless sink, no execution.
Let me run all 3 through 1 frame so the relationship is visible, because seeing them side by side is what turns a wordy exam scenario into a quick decision.
Good call. 4 rows, 3 columns, the same payload traveling 3 different routes. Reflected travels through the request, stored travels through the database, and DOM travels through the page's own script. The exam question almost always hinges on which row is true.
1 line to keep. Reflected is 1 victim. Stored is everyone. DOM is invisible to the server.
And if the wording trips you, anchor on persistence. Payload saved and runs for later visitors, that is stored. Ran once off a crafted link, reflected. The server never saw it, and it all happened in the browser, DOM.
One more confusion to clear, because the exam pairs it with XSS on purpose. Cross-site scripting is not the same as cross-site request forgery, CSRF. XSS runs the attacker's script in your browser. CSRF makes your browser send a request you did not intend using a session you already have. Script executing is XSS. A forged action is CSRF.
One thing before the next part, and then we move right on. If any of this is clicking, tap that like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for the next one. It takes a second, it costs nothing, and it helps more than you would think. Theory is over. Let me show you exactly what an attacker types to steal a session cookie and what the browser does with it. Everything here runs in an isolated lab against a target we control, because the whole point is to understand the mechanics well enough to defend against them. We have a deliberately vulnerable comment field, the kind you would build for practice in something like DVWA. It takes whatever I type and drops it onto the page without cleaning it first. Let me start with the simplest possible probe a tester uses to confirm the door is even open.
The probe is alert of document.cookie. If a pop-up appears and shows the session cookie, the field is executing your input as code instead of displaying it as text. That one pop-up is the entire vulnerability proven in a single line.
So the pop-up is not the attack. My read is that the pop-up is the receipt. It just tells the attacker the door is open, and the real attack is the very next line.
Correct. A real attacker does not pop an alert and announce themselves. They send the cookie somewhere they quietly control, and they do not even need a script tag to do it. Watch.
Walk through what that one line does because it is elegant and awful. The image source is the single letter X, which does not exist, so the image fails to load on purpose. Because the load failed, the browser dutifully runs the on-error handler, and that handler quietly fetches a URL on the attacker's server with the victim's cookie tacked on. No click, no warning, no script tag for a keyword filter to catch. The victim never sees a thing.
So a defender's first instinct is usually a filter, a list of bad words to strip out before anything runs. It feels airtight, and it is one of the most common mistakes in web security. Let me show you why it fails, because before anyone says my filter just blocks the word script, watch how little that buys you. There are a dozen ways to run code with no script tag anywhere in sight, and a browser happily runs every one of them.
That is the whole reason the defense conversation coming next lands where it does. There are too many ways to spell a payload to ever block them all by hand. Liam, you have been sitting on the question that gets to the real stakes here. Go ahead and put it to the room.
Yes, and it is the one that genuinely scares me. Once they have the session cookie, do they even need the password at all?
No. They paste your cookie into their own browser and they are you. The site already trusts that token, so it never asks for a password again. And that is the answer to the viewer question from scene 1. Your site can store no passwords at all, and XSS still hands over the live session. That is account takeover with no password and no second factor prompt.
And the cookie is only the most common goal, not the only one. The same injected script can log every keystroke in a form, which is exactly how the 2018 British Airways attack skimmed around 380,000 payment cards. That one never needed a cookie at all, and the exfiltration step is worth slowing down on because the demo made it look trivial. The script does not email anyone. It just makes the victim's own browser quietly fetch a URL on a server the attacker controls, with the stolen data tacked on as a parameter. To the network, it looks like one more outbound request among hundreds.
Which is why attackers favor a lookalike domain for the collector. To a monitoring tool, it blends in, and to the victim, it is invisible. No alert, no redirect. The page they wanted loads exactly as expected.
So a payload can read what you type, redraw the page to fake a login prompt, or fire requests as you. The honest reason XSS is rated high impact is that once script runs in the page, the attacker has the same powers the real site does, silently, in your name.
And notice the chain we just walked. A vulnerable field led to a proof. The proof led to a cookie stealer, and the stealer led to full account takeover. My read is that progression, from harmless-looking input to total control, is exactly what makes this objective worth your time.
So we have watched a session cookie walk straight out the door. The obvious question is how you stop it, and there is a genuine fork here that trips up working engineers and exam candidates alike. Pick the wrong primary defense and you ship something that feels safe in the demo and still bleeds cookies in production. Here is where the room stands. River says the fix belongs at the input, cleaning the data as it arrives. Liam says the input is the wrong battlefield entirely and the real fix is at the output. That is a real disagreement with a real exam answer at the end of it. River, make your case.
Filter the input. When data arrives, strip the dangerous characters before it is ever stored. Block the angle brackets. Block the on-error attribute. Sanitize on the way in. One sanitizer at the front door, covering every field. One place to audit. Stop the payload there and it never reaches a single visitor.
Hold on, which front door though? That is the whole problem.
Let me finish the thought. One entry point per field, sanitized as it lands. It is the simplest thing to reason about.
But here is what I keep bumping into. How do you know at input time every place that one piece of data will later appear? The same comment might land in HTML on one page, then inside a JavaScript variable on another, then inside a URL in an email, and each of those contexts treats different characters as dangerous. A quote mark is harmless in HTML text but lethal inside a script string. You cannot sanitize for a destination you have not seen yet. My read is that input filtering is really just guessing.
River, answer that head on. If you sanitize for HTML on the way in, what happens when that same stored string gets dropped into a script block on a different page 6 months later?
It can slip right through. I will concede that a blacklist of bad characters is brittle, and attackers have bypassed input filters for 20 years with creative encoding in edge cases.
So my position is encode on output, in the exact context where the data is used. Right before it hits the page, turn the angle bracket into its harmless HTML entity so the browser shows it as literal text and never as a tag. Same string, made inert, fixed at the place it would have fired.
I will grant that is the more elegant control. The data stays raw in storage, and it only gets made safe at the precise moment it is rendered. You are right that I cannot match that with an input filter alone.
Before either of you claims the win, let me put the control neither of you named on the table, because the exam loves it. Even perfect output encoding assumes every developer remembers to do it on every field, forever. People forget. So you layer a content security policy on top, a header that tells the browser which scripts it is even allowed to run. Set it well and an injected inline script simply will not execute because the browser refuses anything not on the allow list. The image on error trick from scene 3 dies on arrival, even if one developer forgot to encode that one field. Think of it as the net under the tightrope.
Then why not just ship the policy and skip the encoding work entirely?
Because it is a net, not the wall, and the exam treats it exactly that way. A content security policy is defense in depth on top of encoding, never a replacement for it. Policies get misconfigured, get loosened for one stubborn feature, and then the net has a hole. If a question offers CSP as the only fix, that is the trap answer. Now push back for me the other way, River. Liam basically called input filtering a trap. Is there truly nothing input validation buys you at all?
There is, and I will defend that much. Input validation still belongs in defense in depth. A phone number field should reject anything that is not digits, full stop. But I accept it is not the primary control against XSS. It is a layer, not the wall.
And I will hand you one honest exception, River, because it is fair. There is one case where you genuinely cannot just encode everything. Picture a comment box that is supposed to allow real rich text like bold and links. Encode all of it to literal text, and the whole feature breaks.
Right, and that is where people reach for a homemade blacklist and lose. The correct tool there is not a hand-rolled filter. It is a vetted sanitizer library that parses the HTML and keeps a strict allow list of safe tags while stripping every script vector.
Say that rule out loud because it is a takeaway of its own. Allow list, never block list. Name the handful of tags you trust and discard everything else, instead of trying to guess every dangerous thing an attacker could ever type.
And flag the limit so nobody walks away thinking a sanitizer replaces encoding. That library is only for the narrow case where you must render user HTML for plain text, which is the overwhelming majority of fields. Output encoding is still the answer. So call it Tiffany. What is the order?
So here is the verdict, and the published guidance is not ambiguous. The OWASP cross-site scripting prevention guidance is explicit. The primary defense is context-aware output encoding, applied at the moment data is written into the page. Then a content security policy as the defense in-depth layer behind it, and input validation as a valuable secondary control, never the main one. So the verdict is all three, in that order. Output encoding is the wall, the policy is the net, input validation is the backstop.
Which means nobody actually loses this debate. I was right on the primary control, and River was right that input validation still earns its keep as a layer. The viewer just gets the order straight.
Exactly. So on the exam, when the question asks for the single best defense against cross-site scripting, the answer is output encoding, not input filtering. Encoding is the wall because it defends the exact place the script would otherwise execute, and everything else backs it up.
We landed the verdict, so let me make the defenses concrete. On the exam and in real code, these stack into layers, and each layer covers the gap the one before it leaves. Start with the wall. Context-aware output encoding takes a dangerous less than sign and rewrites it as its HTML entity &LT before it ever reaches the page. The browser then renders the literal characters and never reads them as the start of a tag.
And the word context-aware is doing real work there. You encode differently for HTML than for a JavaScript string than for a URL. The right encoder for the destination is the whole game, which is exactly why the panel landed on output, not input.
Let me put the fix on screen as actual code next to the attack because that side-by-side is what makes it real. Here's the same vulnerable comment field from scene 3 once it is repaired. The vulnerable version dropped the raw comment straight onto the page with inner HTML so the script tag ran. The safe version passes it through text content instead, so the dangerous less than sign becomes its harmless entity and the browser prints the words rather than running them.
Layer 2 is the header that backs it up, the content security policy Erica fought for in the debate. You send a policy that names exactly which origins may run script and forbids inline script entirely, so even a payload that slips past the encoder has nowhere to execute. And while we are setting headers, we set the cookie flags in the same breath. This is where Scene 3's whole attack goes to die. Watch the last two lines especially.
Notice the policy does the heavy lifting without trusting any one developer. No inline script means the image on error trick from scene 3 is dead on arrival, even if someone forgot to encode that one field.
And the third layer goes straight at the payoff from scene 3. If the attacker's entire goal was reading document.cookie, what if the cookie simply cannot be read by JavaScript at all? That is the HttpOnly flag on the last line.
Set HTTP only on the session cookie and client-side script can no longer read it. The image on error trick still fires, but it grabs nothing. The cookie is invisible to JavaScript.
Worth being precise because the exam is. HTTP only does not fix the underlying flaw. The injected script still runs. It just cuts the single most common payoff, session theft, off at the knees, which is why it sits on every XSS checklist as a must-have.
And the same one line gives you two more protections. Secure keeps the cookie off plain HTTP, and same site blunts the cross-site request for jury that so often rides in next to XSS. One header, three protections.
And the quiet hero of modern web security is the framework itself. React, Angular, and the rest auto-encode output by default, which is why most new code is safe unless a developer deliberately reaches for the escape hatch that turns that encoding off.
So the bug usually is not the framework, It is someone disabling the framework's protection to make one stubborn feature render the way they wanted. In React, that escape hatch is literally named dangerously set inner HTML, and the word dangerous is not decoration. The moment you use it, you have opted out of the auto-encoding and taken the safety on yourself.
So the review rule writes itself. Trust the default, and treat that escape hatch as a code review red flag every single time you see it. If someone reached for it, they had better be piping the value through a real sanitizer first, or it is a bug waiting to ship.
And if you want the authoritative checklist for every one of these, this is the page to bookmark. The OWASP cross-site scripting prevention cheat sheet lists the rules in order, and output encoding sits right at the top where the debate said it would.
Output encoding is the first rule on that page, with input validation listed lower as a supporting measure. The published guidance and our panel verdict line up exactly, which is reassuring when you are betting an exam answer on it.
One placement note before we close. The single highest value place to fix XSS is the template layer, the exact moment a value is rendered into the page. Fix it there and you cover every route at once, reflected, stored, and DOM.
And tie the layers back to the attack we ran because that is how it sticks. Output encoding stops the script from ever forming. The content security policy stops it from running if it slips through. HTTP only stops the cookie from leaving even if it runs. If you forget everything else, remember those 3 nets stacked under one tightrope.
Here is the whole episode in one breath. Cross-site scripting runs attacker code in the victim's browser in reflected, stored, and DOM flavors because data got mistaken for code. The cure is output encoding first, then a content security policy and HTTP only.
One thing you can do tonight. Open your own session cookie in the browser tools and check whether HTTP only is set. If it is not, that one-line change closes the cookie theft door we just walked through.
My favorite moment was watching a broken image steal a cookie with no script tag anywhere. And wait until next time when we drop a level lower into memory itself, feed a program too many letters, and watch that crash become an attacker's doorway.
And remember the exam anchor. Best single defense against cross-site scripting is context-aware output encoding, not input filtering. Everything else is a layer behind it.
If this made cross-site scripting finally click, hit like and subscribe because we are building the full Security Plus series objective by objective, and there are free practice questions waiting for you at certs.professorerica.com. And before you go, tell us in the comments. After watching that cookie walk out the door, is your own session cookie set to HTTP only, yes or no? That one answer says a lot about how exposed you are. Screenshot the claim, then check the claim.
Tiffany, that was genuinely useful content delivered genuinely well. 9 out of 10. This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.